Today we begin with Raj Yoga. Earlier we had planned to have these classes on Thursdays, but we had to shift it to Saturday 4:30. We had one class, and I hope you have listened to that talk. Of course, it's not really that talk is not really related to today's talk, but it's a good idea if you can listen to the first talk. We begin this class with Pradhan Mantra, Sana Vavatu, which means that may we, that means the person who is conducting the talk or the class and those who are attending, may we have love for each other, concern for each other. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Now, we are switching off the chat, and towards the end of the talk, we will restart the chat. If you have any important question and questions strictly based on the talk that we will be having today, you can write your question down, and if we can address those questions today, well and good. Otherwise, we will take it up in the next talk. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, as we mentioned in the previous talk, they are very cryptic, very short, and impossible to understand unless you have been brought up in that tradition. Commentary is needed for each of these sutra class of literature, and two famous commentaries available on the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are one by Vyas and another by Bhoj. And in earlier times, the name was Yoga Sutras, and there was occasional mention of it as Raj Yoga because it accepts no belief, no hocus pocus, and everything is rational, as we shall see. As we proceed, we shall see how rational it is. Swamiji brought Raj Yoga to center stage because as far as main philosophy is concerned, it was on the fringe. Although we talk of 6 systems of Indian philosophy, as we mentioned in the previous talk, and Sankhya and Yoga, these are the twin philosophies. Of this, Yoga is believed more to be on the practical side of spiritual practices. So as far as its philosophy is concerned, it draws its philosophy entirely from Sankhya, and Sankhya is definitely much more famous even today. And as for yoga, it was considered to be antaranga sadhana, it was a kind of spiritual practice. So it did not find place on the center stage of Indian philosophy. Swamiji brought it on the center. And today, as far as I am concerned, personally, I can talk about me. I find the understanding of spiritual matters in Hinduism, in any of the Hindu philosophy, as also in any of the other religions, impossible without this Raj Yoga. I could write my book, The World of Religions, as also The Living Hinduism, my 2 major works on religions, only because I had studied Raj Yoga very thoroughly. Unless you understand yoga philosophy, you cannot understand any religion. And all the fanaticism, all the fights that you see coming from different religions, it's simply because they don't know yoga. If they study yoga, they will understand how their masters came up with those spiritual truths and how they spread it. Now, as we mentioned, that yoga accepts nothing. It believes in nothing. It takes up a very fundamental fact, and that is we human beings Each one of us has a unique mind, and everyone is conscious of this mind, just this much, and from there it proceeds. As we proceed on this talk, on this series of talks, we shall see how Patanjali systematically builds his philosophy, in which he does not assume anything. Now, yoga is mostly about mind. It pays very little attention to the world or heaven or hell or even God. And as far as Atman is concerned, it calls Purush. Yoga does not discuss much about Purush. Like in Upanishads, we find a huge amount of discussion on Atman. Yoga does not discuss much. It discusses because ultimately that is the goal. And Mukti being the ultimate goal, the philosophy has to discuss the conscious principle, pure consciousness, which is Purush. Now, yoga being mostly about mind, we need to have some understanding of what exactly mind is. Particularly because nowadays we find there are lots of discussions going on consciousness. Even here at our university, we recently had a seminar or webinar on consciousness. So we have this problem of mind, the problem of soul from Judeo-Christian traditions, not from the Indian traditions, and Atman from the Indian tradition. Atman and soul, they are not same. Swamiji, when he went to America, he often interchanged Atman with soul because those Americans, they would not understand what Atman is. So he used the word soul. But soul and Atman are different, as we shall see. And we have this, so thus we have mind, we have this soul, we have this Atman, we have this consciousness, and we also have this brain. How to go about all this? Are they same? Are they different? And how yoga looks at it? We shall have today's discussion will be dedicated to this particular topic. Now, each one of us, howsoever dull we might be, and however great we might be, each one of us has some idea about what mind is. Although not many of us, and definitely not every one of us, goes deep into finding out what exactly mind is. Somehow we leave the study of mind to neurologists, to psychologists, and maybe to yogis. Although we are what our mind is. In spite of that, see, we study everything. We study history, we study geography, we study physics, we study this and we study that. And we also study a lot of rot, but we never study mind. And the surprising thing is that we are what our mind is, and yet we don't. So, what is mind? Looking very broadly, we are not getting into any system right now. Just what exactly is mind? When we say mind, what exactly we understand by mind? In very simple terms, we can say that it is the cognitive faculty of a person. That knowledge that we get, any person who cognitive faculty, and it is in the form of perception. That is whatever we get through our five senses, thinking, imagination, memories, and dreams. When you take all these faculties, because we get some knowledge in dreams also, because we see things in dreams, we imagine things, and we get things in memory, and we also make a rational analysis of things. But most importantly, we perceive things. We take in the world through our five senses, which is direct perception. So we have perception, we have thinking, we have imagination, we also have wild imagination, which has no truth as such, and we have this dream state, we have dreamless state, but we are talking about knowledge. In dreamless state, we don't have any knowledge. So, and memory, most importantly. All these faculties, these are cognitive faculties, we know through all these methods. So when we combine all these things, the faculty through which this knowledge comes to an individual is mind. This is the broadest classification, the broadest definition that we can make of mind. Now this same faculty, all these things that we discussed, that is perception, imagination, thinking, and dream, etc. It also helps us analyze whenever anything comes to us. For example, you will often see that you get up in the morning and you remember what you dreamed, and then you try to find a meaning out of it. You're trying to analyze why I dreamed this, why I dreamed that. And sorry, before analysis comes categorization. You categorize it. Was it good? Was it bad? Was it helpful? Is it making you happy? And then you analyze why. And finally, you decide. We will have more of it a little later when we get into how yoga looks at mind, that is, actual sutras begin. Then we will discuss it in more detail. Now, when you look at the Indian tradition, by Indian traditions, we mean all 6 systems of philosophy, which we mentioned in the previous class, in the first talk. There we find that we also believe that mind is the reservoir of sanskars. Sanskaras are the impressions. Whatever we do, whatever we think, whatever we talk, they all leave some impression on our mind. It's something like, you can say, very broadly speaking, you can think of those impressions, something like that ATM card. When you put in that machine and you take out that money, it is recorded how much of money you took, what withdrawals were made. Now that impression, something like that. I'm giving you just a broad idea. So they leave a subtle impression. Now when you are carrying your ATM card, it does not carry the physical money, but it can tell you about every transaction that you have made. Mind is something like that. It carries the sanskaras from time immemorial. From the time that you came into existence, millions and millions of births ago, mind contains every impression. Although not every impression comes to the surface. This is what we Indians believe. Now we also find that mind has a special power, very unusual power, to remember things from the previous birth. Generally, it is believed that some kids, not all, they believe their past lives till about they are 5 years old. And there is a very, very beautiful book by Ian Stevenson. You can look for it on internet. Something like a case on incarnation. It's a beautiful book where he had studied thoroughly, and he had a huge team of volunteers who went into studying such cases where kids remembered their former lives. Now, in spite of all this thing, in spite of all this, whatever we have discussed, we really do not know what mind is. If you ask a scientist, whether he's a neurologist or she's a psychologist or a psychiatrist, he or she really cannot explain what exactly mind is. And when you come to religion, they also do not agree, nor they can define very clearly what mind is. Now, this is where the importance of our discussion lies. If you chance to read any book on the idea of mind, idea of consciousness, there are great works on this topic. And on internet, even like on Wikipedia, once I was just having a glance at Wikipedia and I was surprised the kind of studies there have been. And one very interesting thing that you will find about mind is that as the science develops, science tries to understand mind exactly from its own standpoint. So in earlier times, when, say, during the time of Archimedes, science was, or technology was confined to levers and pulleys, etc., they considered mind something like that. And today, when we have computers and processors, we are comparing mind with that. So this goes on. Now, our issue is not how they say it. If we look at the present day science, particularly the neurologists and the psychologists, including the psychiatrists, not Indians, mostly the foreigners, Most of them, nearly all of them, believe that mind is somehow the sum total of brain function. Brain, which is a physical organ with something like 100 billion, billion is 100 crore, 100 into 100 crore neurons. And the neurons in themselves are not very important. The important is the connection between interconnection. So different neurons are interconnected and they contain all this information coming from our senses as also from memory, etc. So as we know, brain is a physical organ, and when you look at the function of the brain, if you talk to any neurologist, you will be informed that brain, or for us mind, is a huge pattern making machine. It creates pattern whatever you are studying. For example, if you talk to a kid, say 4 or 5 year old kid, you'll find that the kid makes a pattern out of available data that he has, and that pattern will not fit with my pattern or with your pattern. And this world that you see, you make one pattern out of it and I make a different pattern out of it to suit my need. Actually, it's such a huge topic. There have been many occasions when I wanted to write a book on this. In fact, I had named it Empires of Mind. So fascinating, but then the amount of study and hard work involved, it deters me. Now, when it makes that model, it's a working model. It's not a static model. So when you find that some building etc. is to be constructed, they make a model. But no, it's not a static model. It's a working model. And through this working model, we continue our affairs with the world. Now, the interesting thing is that whatever function of mind, which we mentioned earlier, like perception, thinking, memory, dream, etc., it has been conclusively proved, and now with high-tech machines. So there are PET machines and lots of machines. They are putting those machines around the head and they keep on studying through various means. And they find that during every mental function, which we call mind, we find that it is found that the brain is active. So naturally, it means that brain has to be in some way connected with the mind. There's no doubt about it. If you say that whatever function your mind is performing and brain is active at that time, meaning is very obvious. Secondly, a very important thing that the scientists observe. Now, here lies a very important point. For most scientists, they believe in simplicity of things. Now, there's a very famous saying that Einstein believed in simplicity of things. And once he was asked by a media person that what if God did not create in such a simple way? Something like that was the question. Einstein very famously said, then I am not interested. So if it's not simple, I am not interested. Truth has to be simple. God is simple. Truth has to be simple. Now, according to science, when all these functions which we have been discussing about, if those things can be explained easily by the brain function, why make things complex and why bring mind there? So this is a very important point. Why science does not accept mind as something separate. Now, there is something called panpsychism. This is not really a new branch of thinking. This has been there all along. They believe that consciousness pervades everything. And brain is just that machine, a highly developed machine that can catch it. Something like we can say like a cell phone. Brain is something like a cell phone. It catches signal, it also throws out signals. And signals are always there. But unless you have a phone, you cannot catch those signals. And better your mobile phone, better the catching and throwing off signal will be. And that's why you see that phone models are continuously evolving and more powerful phones are coming. And second is, science believes in sensory perception. In fact, there was a time during French Revolution and all when scientists were strong realists. Unless something could be observed, it was not accepted to be science. And that's how, this new term that people keep on talking about, what is the proof? When they want to know what is the proof, it has become a truism. Most people use this sentence without understanding what they are saying. What exactly you mean by proof? You mean only sensory proof, or you want a mathematical equation proof, or you want pure rationality. If it is pure rationality, then every religion is based on pure rationality. If you want is sensory proof of it, no, there is no such proof, because there can never be such a proof. If you want some logical proof, no, there can never be any logical proof, because if God or soul can be proved logically, it only means that it is no God, it is no soul. Why? We shall discuss. So because there is no sensory proof that mind exists, so science refuses to believe in mind. It believes in brain because we can see it. It believes in the function of brain, and it believes that sum total of that function is mind. But then, can we accept this theory? Really? No, we cannot. Because if we observe ourselves, we find that we have different states of existence, which Vedanta categorizes as waking state, sleeping state, that is dreaming state, and deep sleep. And of course, there is the fourth, which is state of spiritual realization. Forget about the old times. Even Sri Ramakrishna was repeatedly talking about this fourth state, which is known as Turiya, when spiritual realization dawns. Now, the very interesting thing about mind is, apart from knowing all these things, mind also creates the sense of I-ness. Now, this is a very important thing. And this is one point where scientists are not able to explain things. Where from comes the sense of I-ness? Like when you say that I saw thing. Here is a camera. Camera captures an image. But capture, as far as we understand, camera does not know that it captured an image. But when we see a thing, we know that I saw thing or we saw things. Where from comes this sense of ego? Now, if ego were truly to be a function of the brain, then naturally, since brain is active throughout, sense of ego is supposed to continue. But when you go into deep sleep and you get up after that, you realize that you had lost the sense of I-ness. In fact, that is the very most important thing, where when we are coming out of deep sleep, it happens often. And we say that, well, I slept so well, I remember nothing. You remember nothing, which means that I-ness disappeared and reappeared in the same format. And that's something amazing. Even in deep sleep, brain is supposed to function, brain functions, but that I-ness goes away. But more importantly, when you go into samadhi, which is turiya, there that I-ness completely vanishes. Now, to tell that you are ready to believe Einstein, and to tell that you are ready to believe Stephen Hawking, and to say that you believe in Newton and Freud and Karl Marx, but you are not ready to believe Sri Ramakrishna, what kind of rationality is this? If you are rational, you need to believe in everyone who is consistent about his words. Rather, you will find that these people are not very consistent. For example, Einstein himself, he kept on changing his theories. And he gave wrong theories. And he came up with that universal constant. And he himself said that that was the greatest mistake of his life. So now we are ready to believe somebody who was giving us wrong theories, who kept on changing his theories, and we are not ready to believe somebody who was consistent. We are ready to believe these Nobel Prize winners, those who get Nobel Prize, and they get Nobel Prize. How? Because they have been working in some institute to earn some money. That means they have some kind of selfish interest. Now, these people like Lord Buddha or Sri Ramakrishna, they never had any selfish interest. Now, we are not ready to believe. Now, what kind of rationality is this? You will say that I believe in Einstein, but I don't believe in Buddha. Then I must say you are a very rational person. You don't find any inconsistency in the words of Lord Buddha. You don't find any inconsistency in the words of, say, Sri Ramakrishna. Why should we take him to? I'm not saying that don't believe in science. I don't say that don't believe in these scientists simply because they are selfish. What we mean to say that any knowledge that comes to us and which has a consistency about it must be taken into consideration. That is being the true scientific spirit. Ramakrishna Mission has some respect in the society simply because the monks of the Ramakrishna Mission have a very high scientific temper. And this was given to us by Sri Ramakrishna himself and, of course, by Swami Vivekananda. So we find that this sense of ego, it keeps disappearing and appearing. This raises question. This is not the only question. There are lots of other questions. Now, what about the past memory? Now, just to say that, memory of previous life. To say that you are not ready to believe, again you are making the same mistake. When you have hundreds of such cases and proven, and even Hindus who really believe in this, they don't want to discuss it in case they find somebody. If they find that they have a kid who has past memory, they don't want to encourage it because it's a new beginning. For example, many of us, when we were young and kids, we used to make New Year resolution. The idea was, from today we begin a new life. Although it did not last even half a day, that's a different matter. But the desire to have a new beginning. Once you die, and then you are born, it's a new beginning. If it's a new beginning, why go back to the past? When you have outgrown something, when you have come out of something, why go back? Why go and lick what you spat out? You have spat it out. Why go back to that? No, you should not. So, there is this memory of past life. How do you justify it? And if you chance to read this work by Ian Stevenson, you will realize that no, he was not fooling us. And when the topic comes, we shall be maybe discussing a few cases from Stevenson. And I also personally know of many cases where I know of those kids who remembered their past lives. Then we also find there are lots of things in our life that defy logic. To give you a very simple example, and it's a favorite example of mine, that you will see that very often you set your alarm at whatever time, maybe 5 or 6. And just before alarm rings, just before you wake up, you know that it's time to get up. Most times it does not. Most times you hit the snooze button. But particularly when you are about to do something very important or embark on some important journey and you set an alarm, your mind tells it's time. How? If it's brain function, how does it know? Then there is intuition. Intuition is such an important thing in our life. And all the great achievers, they admit that they gain spatial power through intuition. Jim Corbett mentions in one of his works, it's not very important to discuss here, But just a mention of it. Once he was chasing a tigress, man eater, and he had been chasing it the whole day. And somehow he knew that the tigress is also on lookout for him. And they were kind of hiding from each other. And finally, Jim Corbett was crouching under a stone. And suddenly he had a feeling that the tigress is looking at him. And he describes beautifully there was absolutely no external signal. Not a leaf, not a leaf had moved. Nothing. No bark of an animal, no twittering from any bird, nothing. He just had a feeling. And he turned and he saw that tiger was sitting up and I was about to jump, about to make that jump. I would have been finished. Similarly, and then of course he took out his gun and shot it. Then you will see that there have been many occasions in our lives when we get alarm signals. Many times. Personally, I know of hundreds of times when I got alarm signals. Something is amiss. And you find it to be true. And there have also been cases when moms, they have been separated from, there's physically, they are away from their children, their child. And intuitively, they know that something has gone wrong with the baby. They know. And moms who are listening to this talk, they know that there have been many occasions when their baby has been crying. Mom intuitively knows that my baby is crying. There is no explanation to it, how it happens. Surprising thing is that science tries to overlook all this. Why? It simply means that they have some axe to grind. There's something funny about it. Because if they admit of these things, they will have to change a lot of things. And the most important thing that they will have to change is their belief in their own religion. That's the worst part. Science is dominated by the Western scientists, and even if they don't accept themselves to be religious, their family is deeply interested in their religion, Judeo-Christian, Abrahamic religions, be it Jews, be it Christians, be it Muslims. And their scriptures will never allow them to accept all these truths of past life, the Sanskars, the intuition, the interconnectivity of minds. Their world will go topsy-turvy if they accept all that. So how this Judeo-Christian tradition, this is the first theory was of the science, and we saw how science is hopelessly inadequate to explain the relationship, in explaining that mind is a mere function of the brain. Now on the other hand, just exactly opposite to it is Judeo-Christian tradition, that is Abrahamic religions, the three, Jews, Christians and Islam. According to them, if you read Old Testament, you will see, and all three follow that theory of creation, that God created man from matter. And then very importantly, he breathed spirit in it. It's a very interesting thing. Man, not woman, mind it. Man. He created man. And from the rib, he created female. Now, we are not going into all those issues. The important thing is that this is something they believe, that there is matter and God breathed spirit. This spirit is consciousness. And this is what they call soul. When Christians talk of soul and when Muslims talk about ruh, they mean this breath which has come from God. So there is God and there is matter. God breathes spirit. Now if you study things very deeply, you will realize that somewhere their idea of consciousness, their idea of soul and their idea of mind, they are all same. For them, mind is soul. And mind, I don't mean only the thinking faculty, but also the emotional aspect. So all these emotional and higher emotions and all those things combined. So if you read any work on consciousness, and particularly say a century back, they firmly believe, Christians firmly believe that plants have no life, no consciousness, dogs, cats, etc. They do not have soul. There's a very famous novelist, Ishiguro. He wrote one novel where he mentions that he is talking about a futuristic society where clones have been made of criminals and the scums of the society, and they are supposed to be organ donors. It's a very moving novel, very moving novel. So, and there is one lady from the civilized part of the society who is trying to prove that these people also have a soul, mind it. And to prove that, what that lady does is they encourages these clones to paint, to draw. And she takes those paintings and drawings to show to the main society that, see, they can draw and they can paint simply because they have soul. There's the idea, their idea of soul, mind it. No, but this is what mind is. Now, whenever you find all these seminars and webinars and all these great books or discussion that discuss on consciousness, you will realize that they're just talking about mind and the different aspects of mind. To them, consciousness is mind. Although they cannot really explain that, because when they take into consideration emotions and intuitions, all those things, which for us belongs exclusively to mind. For them, soul, consciousness, mind, these are kind of connected, interconnected. Sometimes they are one, sometimes they are different. Now you see, the problem lies that if we accept that, if we accept the theory of soul according to this Judeo-Christian tradition, that is Abrahamic religions, very serious problems come. Why? God, God breathed spirit. If God breathed spirit and the way they present it, it only means that spirit is non-material, because body is material. God created human body from matter and he breathed spirit. So matter and spirit, these are two different things, which means spirit is non-material. That means mind is non-material. Now if mind is non-material, it's a very simple logic actually. Although you may find it difficult to grasp if you are listening it for the first time. If mind is non-material, non-material thing, anything material, if it's material, it can be pinpointed on the graph of time and space. When Einstein talked about space and time, now it was nothing new for us. We have all along known that space and time, they are intertwined. And when space is born, time is also born. When time is born, space is also born. And everything physical can be pointed on this huge graph of space and time. And if it is non-material, then what happens? It cannot be pinpointed on this graph of time and space. If it cannot be pinpointed in time and space, it simply means that that thing has to be either infinite or it has to be pointless. Because anything which is in between pointless and infinite has to have a place in the space, it has to have a spot in time. But if you say that mind or soul is non-material, then either it is infinite or it is pointless. That is absurd. To think that my mind is infinite and your mind is infinite, this is absolutely absurd, because mind is functioning here. It cannot be infinite, nor can it be pointless. Secondly, a more dangerous problem comes that indeed if mind is non-material, then how can it act on the brain, which is material? Brain is matter, we know. We measured how it has 100 billion neurons. That spirit is working within the body. Actually, when they talk about soul, soul has a meaning only when it is with a body. So, how does soul act on the body? That soul, which is connected with consciousness, and consciousness, which is connected with mind, according to Abrahamic religions, how can something which is non material act on matter? It's an absurd situation. Because we are talking logically, it's not about questioning the authority of any religion, mind it. We are just talking very rationally. Now, very dangerously, which is a very, very, very dangerous proposition. If indeed mind is non material, then it cannot store information. And you know that mind is all about memory. If mind does not contain memory, it is no mind. And if mind is non material, it cannot store information. Now, this idea of information, it comes from physics. In physics, nowadays we have this information theory and all this, how fast information flows. It's a new subject and is huge subject, information theory. Now, mind cannot store memory if it is indeed non-material. Now, from there we come to the third. So we just broadly classified. Now, this is not no ultimate classification. We are just discussing a broad classification. First was science, where it says that it's function of mind. That is, mind is totally and grossly function of something which is matter, that is material. Secondly, the second viewpoint is from Judeo-Christian tradition, according to which mind is non-material. And we found that problem lies with both of them. Now, third one is what yoga has to offer. That is Sankhya and Yoga. And that idea has been taken up by Vedanta also, although Vedanta makes certain modifications. Now, because we are not studying Vedanta, we will not be discussing in detail how Vedanta looks at it. For that, if you are interested truly, you can listen to our talks on Gita. That's there in English. And in 7th chapter, etc., we have discussed how Vedanta looks at mind. To explain in very brief, because we will have to take up this topic once again. Sankhya and Yoga, and now we shall be using only the yoga term because slowly we are moving towards yoga. Yoga believes that there is pure consciousness, which is known as Purush or Atman, and there is Prakriti, which is matter. Now, what is Prakriti? Now, if you are indeed interested in yoga philosophy, you will have to understand this concept because this will keep coming again and again. Prakriti is described as combination of three qualities, pure qualities. Now, pure quality is something which is very difficult for us to understand. Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. Tamas is inertness, Rajas is activity, and Sattva is equilibrium. We will be talking about this in far more detail later. Now, Purush and Prakriti, they are independent of each other. Sometimes, now we don't know why it happens, how it happens. Purush and Prakriti come in close proximity of each other. The moment they come in close proximity of each other, the balance of Prakriti gets disturbed. Don't confuse Prakriti with females. Prakriti is matter, Purush is pure consciousness. Balance of Prakriti is disturbed, and Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, they were kind of three heaps which were in balance, and suddenly that balance has been lost. Now, something very funny happens. These three, they always stay together. You cannot take only sattva out or you can take only tamas out. They will always be together, always. And they always try to overpower each other. So they keep on changing from one to the other. Now, there is that pure consciousness, which is Purush. And we have this ever changing Prakriti. Prakriti is ever changing, mind it. Because if Prakriti is not changing, in that case, there will be a balance. If there is a balance, it is no creation. So everything in creation is ever changing. Nothing remains static in this universe. Now there is consciousness because consciousness had come in the proximity of matter, and that is why this disturbance came. And because there has been this disturbance, you can imagine light and something which can kind of reflect. This reflector gets lighted up. For example, moon gets lighted up because the sun's light gets reflected from the moon surface. Or you can think of a tube light through which electricity flows and the tube gets lighted up. Once the tube gets lighted up, you can see the tube light and you can also see things in that light. When the moon rises in a dark night, you can see the moon and you can also see things, although not that distinctly because it's not a very good reflector. But think that in case it were a good reflector, for example, Earth is a far better reflector, and they say that from moon you can see the light of Earth far more clearly. Now, if you take up this view, then you realize that mind is not conscious. Mind is then matter, as the scientists say. It appears conscious, the way Judeo-Christians say. So kind of yoga, independently of course, yoga never knew what scientists are going to discuss, say 2500 years later, and it definitely knew nothing about Judeo-Christian traditions. But if you take up the yoga standpoint, you find that these two apparently contradictory standpoint of the science and Abrahamic religions get harmonized in yoga. Not because yoga is harmonizing. Yoga was many centuries and maybe millennia before these ideas came up. The idea that mind is pure material is there in yoga. And that mind is conscious is there in yoga. Only that it's not pure consciousness, it is reflected consciousness. And of course, mind is matter. Why? Because when that consciousness is seen through this, the first immediate disturbance of Prakriti, what now appears as Prakriti, now it's no more Prakriti, it is known as cosmic mind. Something like whole thing has been lit up. That huge lighting up, this is known as cosmic mind. And every mind in the universe is just a small fragment of that universal mind. We shall be taking up creation according to yoga, which is a very important thing, without which we will not be able to understand the Yoga Sutras, that we will take up after maybe some classes. There we shall see how from cosmic mind, individual mind evolves. So, when we have this mind, now why they believe in that mind, that also we shall discuss. But here just two very important things, that mind is finite, it is material, it's not infinite mind, it's finite. But it appears conscious, and most importantly, it also appears independent. So if we have a look at these scientific theories and we have a look at these Judeo-Christian theories, we shall see how they are talking about whether mind is finite, whether mind is independent. We find that mind appears independent, mind appears infinite, but actually mind is finite and mind is totally dependent on pure consciousness. But why can't it be conscious? The way Judeo-Christians say that it's consciousness, no, it cannot be. Yoga, actually, there are many arguments concerning this. We are just picking two fundamental arguments. One is, whenever there is an object, say here is this pen. Now, one object, the same object does not create same kind of impression in two different minds. We find that the impressions are different. The objectivity is missing. For example, whatever camera you may use, if you take a picture of something, it will give you the same picture. Mind does not give you the same picture, which means that mind is not fundamental. If it were fundamental, it will always present to you the fact the way it is. Mind never presents it. Secondly, one knows one's state of mind. You say that I am angry. You say that I was dreaming. You say that I was imagining. So the state of mind, everyone, it's not that I know your state of mind. Thing is, I know my state of mind. Now that makes things amazing. If you know your state of mind, that means mind cannot be fundamental thing. Now science will try to explain this in its own way, but that's secondary. We have discussed how science has its own problem, and yoga also has its problem. Why it has its problem? Because any stimulus, if there is any stimulus, it requires energy. So now when we are thinking, or when we are trying to recollect something, mind will require some energy. Where from this energy comes? So mind must have some food. And mind also must have some kind of excretion about which we have no idea. Then again, there is this problem of transfer of, even though mind is finite and mind is energy, mind is actually form of energy only. So this transfer of energy from mind to brain, we know that if you have to move, say, even an electron, it requires some energy. So this transfer of energy, we really do not understand how exactly it takes place. Now, when Swamiji was talking about yoga and Swamiji was talking about mind on different occasions, he very clearly said that mind is a phase of matter. Matter has different phases. For example, there is solid, and then there is liquid, and there is gas. Similarly, mind is a phase of matter which is much, 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 much more fine. And it is a force. And just like any other force, like gravitational force or electrical force, it follows certain rules. I personally work out in the sense for my own use, and I'm sure you will not agree to that. No one will agree to that because I don't have any proof of that. Is that I felt that in gravitation, in electricity, in magnetism, inverse square law is followed. Inverse square law essentially means that as the distance grows, the force decreases. And the force of attraction or repulsion is dependent on the two bodies. Now, in gravitation, it attracts things irrespective of its electrical charge or magnetic pole. In electricity and magnetism, they attract opposites, they repel the similar. Now, my belief is that mind also does the same thing. It also follows the inverse square law, and it also follows the force as per the product of two units. So if two minds are separated, their attraction reduces. That's why we say out of sight, out of mind. Just that gravitation attracts all kinds of matter irrespective of what its charge is. In case of mind, it's the opposite. That it is different from gravitation, electricity, and also magnetism. It attracts similar minds and it repels the opposite or dissimilar mind. And the force of attraction or repulsion is square of the distance, inversely square of the distance. So if you are near a person whom you don't like, The force of repulsion within you increases. And if that force, as we say, now, you move away from me, I can't tolerate you. Once that person moves away from you, you are calm. Well, it's just a theory. But Swamiji was very firm about it. Then Swamiji said that when we eat, when we take food, the gross aspect of it gives us physical energy, which is expressed through our limbs. And its finer aspect gives energy to the mind. So the objection that was raised a little earlier, that is addressed here. Now the question is, does food have a subtler aspect? Personally, I believe this to be correct. Why? If we are into religious study, if we are studying religion, in that case, see what happens. If you believe that man has physical body, man has subtle body, and man has Atman, soul, that is three aspects of reality. Then why can't food have three aspects? So food can always have subtle aspects. So this is what Swamiji talks about. Now comes, why all these problems? Problem is that, see, when we know something, when we want to know something, we know something with the help of the more subtle, more fundamental. In this world, mind is the most fundamental thing. And we know objects with the help of mind. Mind being more fundamental, you need something more fundamental than mind to know. There is nothing more fundamental than mind. Of course, soul is, that is Atman is, but right now we are not bringing that into picture. We are just talking from the standpoint of science. So there is no way that we can know mind simply because mind is fundamental. And because mind is fundamental, one mind cannot know another mind for the same reason. And more importantly, even mind cannot know itself because nothing can act upon itself. The most important faculty of mind is knowledge. Mind cannot know itself simply because, for example, I cannot hold my right hand with my right hand. I can hold anything else with my right hand because nothing can act on itself. The action of mind is knowledge. Mind cannot know itself. The ultimate idea is that mind cannot be known. Mind can never be known either through the function of brain or through the function of the neurons or by mind itself. So these scientists, they can go on discussing the problem of consciousness, the problem of mind. They will never get answers. It's just not possible. There is inherent contradiction in that. Most importantly, mind is not the last word in our existence. As we saw, that beyond mind lies Purusha. We will be discussing yoga. So we are not using the word Atman, we are using the term Purush, which is the conscious principle. So, what do we mean to say through all these discussions? The idea is that since there is no clear cut idea about what mind is, one theory of mind is as good as any other theory. Because mind cannot be understood the way mind is, but mind can be understood through its action, through its act. Now, in science, also earlier we used to study that you cannot know this, but for example, wind. You can't see wind, but you know wind through its effect. Mind can be known through its effect. And because we are what our mind is, and our mind is all along working for us, we need to understand how yoga looks at mind and how mind can be focused, and how through that focused mind we can bear the different layers of existence, and how finally we can be free from the snare of Prakriti. All these things we will be discussing as we proceed. The second sutra of Patanjali, that is Raj Yogis, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is about cessation of Chitta Vritti. We discussed yoga in the first talk. We discussed mind in this talk. In the third talk, we shall discuss what is vritti and what is nirodh. So here we end our talk. Our time is up. I'll just have a quick look at questions, if any. Otherwise, oh my God. Amrinder Singh is saying that gravitation is not any force. Yeah, you are so correct, Amrinder Singh. I hope you have studied Newton's famous equation that G equal to mm by r square. Huh? So if there is no force involved in it, then why? See. Okay. So, well, I find that. So Amrinder Singh seems to be pretty annoyed with whatever I am talking. No, no. Bah, human spirit. Your names are mental garbage of your parents. My God. What language? Oh, human spirit is fiery on me. I can guess who this human spirit is. There are anyway. So let's stop it. Thank you so much.